Hello, everybody, and welcome to week 9 of our Bible reading journey. And this last week, you have really taken a deep dive into the prophets. We have finished the book of Isaiah and the book of Jeremiah, and these books are long. They deal repetitively with the judgment of God, and yet there is some prophetic truth for us today, that is for sure. And so, as we finished Isaiah, I hope you remember that the book of Isaiah is divided into those 3 different parts. And so we read the first part of Isaiah, which is the prophet Isaiah speaking to the people of Israel as they approach the exile, as the people of Israel continue to deny God. And I think you recognize in Isaiah and Jeremiah, God has become increasingly frustrated with the people of Israel. And so the Babylonians come in, they take over, they destroy the temple, and they bring the Israelites into captivity, into exile. And please know that that does not mean that every single person who identified as a Jew was taken to Babylon. In fact, there was a diaspora all across the region. People fled into Egypt, they fled throughout the region, and some of them stayed in the geographic country of Israel. They just were not allowed in Jerusalem any longer. And so these people were spread out all over the world, the known world, and they experienced deep grief. And that's what we read in the second part of Isaiah, is this deep and profound grief that they experience as they are separated from their promised land, as they know that their temple has been destroyed, and as they are uncertain of what their future holds. And so Isaiah then turns into words of hope, from words of judgment to words of hope. And finally, at the end of their exile and they begin to return to Jerusalem, we hear the words once more of the book of Isaiah. And this time, these words are probably a collection of different voices. They believe up to 12 different voices wrote this last part as they proclaim to Israel the fulfillment of hope, the promise of a new future, but also a warning of what will happen if they fall into the same pattern again. And so Isaiah is just a rich book, a book that it really encompasses the fullness of the story of the fall, the exile, and then the return to Jerusalem. And I hope that you found fulfillment there. We also read the book of Jeremiah, or we're in the middle of reading the book of Jeremiah. We're about done now. And Jeremiah, I love Jeremiah, and I mentioned this last week in our video and in our class, but the book of Jeremiah speaks so profoundly to me because he is such a reluctant prophet, right? He does not want to be the one who goes to the king, who goes to the royal courts, to the people that he loves and knows and say, hey, God is judging you and God will eventually destroy your city, exile you, and murder, and many people will be murdered. Jeremiah does not want to deliver that message at all, and yet that is the message placed on his heart, a message of deep warning. And I think a lot of us have felt that kind of burden before. Maybe not necessarily that exact burden. Not many of us have had to deliver a message quite so heavy. But we've all been in situations where we have felt the burden, the weight of speaking truth to power, speaking truth to people we love, speaking truth to friends or acquaintances, to speaking truth to coworkers. There is some real empowerment to be found in Jeremiah, who recognizes that this is hard work, that being a prophet, to be the messenger of God, is hard work. And yet, if we cling on to that work, there's real power there, that God can and will speak through us and bring hope, even in dark times. It's probably pretty powerful for us today. As we continue forward, we are continuing our march through the prophets. We have read now Isaiah and Jeremiah. This week we're going to look toward Ezekiel and Daniel. But right between Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you're going to encounter a tiny book called Lamentations. It's only a few chapters long. And this book, I love this book because just kind of like Ecclesiastes gives us the room to ask deep questions, to not always know the answers, and to sometimes just proclaim the vanity, the mist that is this world. Lamentations gives us permission as well. And this time the permission is to be mad at God, to be sad, and to be grieving in the midst of God, and to ask why. And so as you read through Lamentations, you may not be in a place in your life where you are lamenting anything, but you have been and you will be again. And so take hold of this book. Allow it to be a permission-giving book as you can cling to it and know that God is there even when we're mad, even when we're sad, even when we just don't understand, even when we have a hard time believing. God is there, willing to listen, willing to journey with us. So that's the book of Lamentations. Ezekiel is an interesting prophet for us. Ezekiel is filled with visions and some really cool ones as well. A couple ones to keep your eye out for as you're reading through the book of Ezekiel. First is the vision that begins the book, which is this vision of that God gives Ezekiel of God coming in, and God is in this like chariot that's being pulled by four different beasts, and the chariot's wheels have eyes. It's crazy and super fun. And so enjoy that kind of vision and try to understand, what is it trying to tell us? Pick it apart a little bit. Try to see what God is trying to speak to us, even in those kind of odd vision. Another vision that we encounter, another prophecy we encounter in Ezekiel, is the familiar vision of the valley of dry bones, that God can and will bring those dry bones back to life. I love this vision, and I hope that you enjoy reading it as well. Ezekiel is a prophet who is speaking to the people of Judah in the days leading up. He is a priest in Judah in the days leading up to the exile, and then in exile, he is tasked with being the one who explains to them why it happened and proclaim to them the hope that God will forgive them, that God will deliver them. And so he is an interesting one because he spans the exile. He is in Jerusalem before the exile, and then in Babylon post-exile or during the exile. And so just appreciate that little historical context, because I think that helps give us a pretty clear understanding of who he is and he is speaking to. And then finally, Daniel, you're just going to hit the very, very beginning of Daniel on our last day of reading on Sunday. And Daniel, you always think of Daniel as like Daniel in the lion's den, or you may even remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that's the first chunk of Daniel. But the second chunk of Daniel is filled with these really dense prophetic visions. And so I don't know if we're going to get fully into those visions this week, but just be ready for some familiar stories and then some less familiar visions as we read Daniel together. One thing I want you all to keep in mind as we continue in this journey in the next week or so is that we are coming to the end of the Old Testament, and we are just really kind of moving through the prophets quickly. We have major prophets and minor prophets. Now, major prophets are not more important than minor prophets. They are simply prophets who wrote more, so the books are longer, or people who have attributed more to those words, to those prophets. And so we kind of do these long hauls through these major prophets, like Ezekiel this week, but soon we're going to hit these minor prophets, and those are going to go really quickly. Some of them are just a couple of chapters long. And so this week last week on our Facebook group, I reposted a timeline that has the historical context of all the prophets and the kings, and just kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. But also, I'm going to include it with our weekly email as well. I just want you to have an idea of, when you're reading a prophet, who they are speaking to. Are they pre-exile, exile, or post-exile? That's just really important for us. It helps us keep everything This helps us keep everything in context and helps us understand why they are writing what they are writing and to whom. And so if you have any more questions about that, always feel free to email me. And I always remind y'all, everybody is welcome to come to our class. Even if you have not even come to one class yet, you are welcome, always on a Monday night at 6 p.m. And so I do hope that you will come and be a part of that. We only have like 2 more weeks here in the Old Testament. We are almost done, and we're going to start the New Testament soon. And so I'm excited for that. I know y'all are too. I think that's all we got to talk about today. My prayers are with all of you. I hope your prayers are with me as we continue forward in our Bible reading journey. Thanks, friends.